So much better.
I never played. I don't like my first name. Also, I hate not being sites. Yeah, I also don't like that. Like, it's like you move to like, well, guess what? There's one building. That is like all the time.
It's actually, if you get it down, it's actually a lot of it. It's that back end stuff that gets me. It's like our back end leads are like the most like introverted, like just direct people I've ever met. All they do is sit up there and like lock themselves in for like 8 hours. But they get the biggest
Some people do full stack, some people do back end. I do full stack. It really depends on where you work, what they jive. Depends. It depends. It's highly dependent. Some people feel that way. I sometimes feel that way. I mean, yeah, you learn more if you do full stack of different things, but you get a little bit more targeted if you just do one, right? Yeah. Right. Right. Stream test. Someone should be able to hear me on the stream right now. Sure, that's good.
Actually, have a guy who did it.
Any TAs out there who can check my stream? Hey, Chris, Stephanie, if one of you could check my stream, I posted in the instructor's chat just to make sure it's up and you can hear me and stuff. And it doesn't look bad. I'll talk and I'll say random things right now so that hopefully you get some sound or something. Is it looking okay? Cool. Alright, well, we'll wait. If streamers complain, then we'll deal with it. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I will. I'm going to start the recording as well. Alright. We'll get started in just a couple moments. I just wanted to get the stream out there, so if anyone is streaming, they can join and everyone can be ready and happy and all that fun stuff.
Bootstrap is awesome. There's so many cool things in there. That's generally the way I would you put that in your
Bootstrap.
Yeah. And then you would build it. Wow.
Alright. So, for you Tuesday and Thursday students, if you don't remember, my name's Carson. I've been doing Monday, Wednesday. I took over for that session. How's everyone feeling so far? So in our class, we do this thing called the Fist of Five, where 0 is I hate this is horrible, and 5 is this is amazing, I'm kind of bored actually, kind of a thing, right? So out of 5, 0 to 5, how's everyone feeling so far? It could be anything. You could give me a 0 because you hate someone or something. It doesn't matter, right? Like, okay, so lots of good numbers so far. That's really good. Is there anyone who's feeling, yeah, down? Down? No? Oh, yeah, so that's your own fault, though, so you can't rank us bad for that. Okay, touche, you caught me. Anyone who is feeling not so confident right now, willing to share, want to share why, maybe give us some feedback as to what we could be doing better for you?
You know, I struggled with that first homework, and I wasn't even trying the hard one.
Mm-hmm.
But I also realized why I struggled, and that is that I'm a visual conceptual learner.
Yeah.
And I didn't find my niche between those two things, which is really how I learn.
Yeah.
So I was going back and repeating things, which is well and fine, but it didn't necessarily mean it could cement it for me.
Right.
Now, just in the conversation here, you turned me onto a resource, and then I looked at the way they teach the resources on there. It's exactly the way I learned. So if
fantastic.
I use that resource, that might help.
Would you be willing to share that resource in the Saturday Select?
Pre-Code Camp, and I hadn't used it.
Okay.
You know, I tried Code Academy, which is a totally different thing, and the way that they go, this is what things do it. And when you screw up, it doesn't really show you how you screwed up.
Well, that's awesome.
It's more project-based. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. That's a really good point. So figuring out how to learn things is really important in this class. I've had some conversations with students already who maybe didn't feel like the class was super easy or they were behind or whatever. And really the important thing to take out of this class is the faster you learn how to learn and the faster you learn how to find those good resources, the easier this class gets. frankly, we can teach you all day long all of these things. You're not going to remember everything we go over. It's just as simple as that. There's way too much. And you'll come across a lot of this stuff in the wild that you'll probably forget. I mean, that's just what's going to happen. And you got to figure out how to figure those things out. Really is what it is. That's the most valuable skill you can have. And as you become more senior in your career, what's expected of you is to be able to jump into these new things and just kind of get them done, right? So you've been doing it for long enough that it's easy to do. There comes a point in your career where you've been doing it long enough that it's like, oh, this new language, it's probably similar to language XYZ that I've done, so whatever, we'll do it. And you figure it out, right? And that comes naturally over time. It's just an experience thing. It takes a while to get there, for sure. But if during the course of this 6 months you can figure out how you think about those things, if you learn how you're a learner, right, and you can figure out how to find those resources to really nail those things down, you're going to be super successful no matter what. The other thing, too, is, this class is really hard. There's a lot of content we cover, again. It isn't easy for anyone, I don't think. Even the people that right now are thinking, like, it's easy, there will probably be a time when we get to some content that's just not. It won't click quite like everything else has. Everyone's got their specialties, right? Some people will be HTML, CSS all day. This is cake. I can make the best designs, no problem. That's not me. I can already tell you that. This is like my least favorite thing to do. Other people are like, oh, databases. We get to databases, it clicks. Boom, I got it. Databases, cake, no problem. I could do those all day long. Throw me a database, we'll figure it out, right? Because they're fun or whatever. Some other people will just be into JavaScript. Some other people will get to React, say this is awesome. Some people will like the data structure stuff we do at the end. They'll go, wow, this is awesome. Overall, it's hard. It really is, and we should all expect that, and that's okay if you feel at times like this is really hard and you're really working hard, because you all will be. An important thing is your resource here. So we have 4 awesome TAs. We have some subs that come in from time to time. We have 2 instructors. So hit us all up. One of us will be able to help you, I'm sure, right? So we can't all the time. We've got jobs and lives and stuff, but we'll find time, if not before and after class, maybe sometime during the week, we'll be able to help you, right? Your other students, too. You'll notice as we go through some sections, some people are going to have just, I don't know, they're just going to get it, right? Like I said. And those are the people you're going to want to find, because they might be done with their homework. Hopefully they're willing to help you, and they'll be able to shed some light on how they learned it. Maybe you'll be able to pick up some tricks from them, right? So use your fellow students. They're going to really help you nail this stuff down as well. There's lots of ways you can go about the course. Just try to take advantage of all of the resources you have. Like, we get it. It's really, really hard. There's a lot we're going to cover. Like, we all have to work together to kind of get through this thing, and we will. So even right now, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, which it's very possible that a lot of you are, we'll get through it. Don't worry about it. I guess that's easy for me to say, right? Try not to worry about it. Try not to stress. Another thing, too, that can help a lot of you is, you're probably all working really hard during the week, going home from class, working more, with your days off from class, working hard on your homeworks or whatever. When you go home from class today, if you're done with your homework or you've submitted something that's good enough to get you that grade you need to continue in the course, just relax. Like, don't work on this stuff. Don't work until maybe tomorrow night. Do a refresher for class on Monday or Tuesday or whatever. But don't. Enjoy your Saturday, Get something in so you get that grade. Frankly, those grades are pretty meaningless as long as you get the minimum one to pass the course. No one's going to look back and go, hey, you got a C on the intro HTML profile thing in your first week of class. No one's going to look at that and go, oh, shit, I'm not going to hire you, right? Like, no one's even going to know as long as you got the certificate. So get something in so you have something in. Work on it a little bit later. So if you want to, solidify those skills, that's cool, and then relax. Just chill. Like, it's like going to the gym. You work out one day, you got to take a day off because you need, rest time. Unless you're on steroids. But I don't know. I don't know anyone who does steroids for, like, code. So if you find that, so let me know. I might try it. But, yeah, that's the best you get is a couple monsters in the morning, but then your heart will explode, right? Like steroids. So let's not do that. Anyway, the point is, this is tough. Like, it is. It's really hard. I'm self-taught, so I know what it's like to go through the beginning. I remember being in, doing whatever, finding stuff online and be like, this just doesn't make sense. It just does not make any sense. And then I call them, like, epiphany moments, right? Your career is kind of marked by these epiphanies where one day you're like, oh, I gotta go do this thing again. You're like, wow, this just like makes sense magically. I don't know what happened, but through osmosis or something, I did it enough and it just kind of, boom, I get it. And that kind of happens over and over again as you get further along in your career, and then it starts happening more frequently, right? And you're like, oh, wow, now I get this thing that I never got before. Or you'll revisit something later and it's like, wow, it suddenly makes sense again. Like that happens all the time. And sometimes it's random times. Sometimes you're in the shower, right? And wow, I get that thing now. It's weird, but it'll happen. So class is tough. Does anyone have anything they want to share about the class so far? Anything they've done to make it easier? Any of their concerns? You know, anything else they'd like to share about learning or what's going on? I mean, now's the time to talk about it. Any other feedback you can give me or the TAs or anyone else here who's helping you that we can relay or whatever would be fantastic.
Since you guys have homework due at the end of the day today, I've heard a couple people now saying that, oh, I've been struggling with this for an hour a day, most of it. If you're in that situation where you've been working on something and you're just not getting anywhere, share that problem on the Slack channel.
Yes.
Message one of us.
Absolutely.
Go look for help. Don't just sit there and get frustrated because that's what you're here to learn. So if you don't know it, that's not, you know, you're not doing anything wrong. You just need to learn it. So please ask for help.
Yes, help me.
Help me.
Yeah, that's
if you're in that situation.
that's a great point from Stephanie. That when you get stuck on something for too long, you need to just ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. We're going through this class together. Even when you get to your career and you're doing this full time, you're going to have people to help you, right? You're going to be on a team. Almost none of you will be working in isolation. And if you do, eventually you'll work with someone else, most likely. A lot of times, too, when you start a job as a junior, you're paired with like a senior or something. And there's like a mentorship that happens for a while you get used to it. So even in that scenario, you're not expected to know everything. You're not expected to learn everything yourself. You're not expected to just be this genius who can walk in and be like, yeah, boom, I got it. That's never, ever going to happen, even if you've been in the industry for 15 years. It's still not going to happen. So relying on others is not a bad thing. It's not a weakness. It's most definitely a smart thing to do. The way I view it is if, you know, say Jacob knows something that I don't and I want to learn it, I'm struggling, and I go and ask him, he might be able to tell me things he's learned that are kind of like, you know, missteps I might have, right? I'm going to learn from his experience and hopefully not make those mistakes myself. So I kind of like speed up my learning because I'm learning from his learning, right? And that can be a smart way to approach it. I'm not saying ask everyone every question all the time. You want to do a little bit of learning yourself, but it's okay when you get stuck after an hour or so to ask. What's up, Jesse?
I just need my personal preface. I mean, it all depends on what environment or work group you get with. Whether you get thrown into, if you've been working for a company for 15, 16 years, whether you get thrown onto a project and say, and then the developer leads will say, okay, go do it.
Okay, so that's true. It's not totally fair to say that you'll always get a senior mentorship, right? But most companies are tending to do that these days, and it is a helpful thing to do. And there's always people more experienced on the team than you. So as long as they're not super mean or whatever, then it'll be fine. They'll probably help you. And as long as you go into your jobs knowing that you don't know that much and knowing there are people who are more experienced who can do the certain things a little bit better, and you learn from them and you respect them, they'll usually help you just fine. Even if it's kind of a irritating experience to get help from them, they'll still help you. So, yeah, you don't always get nice help from your employer. What's up? Yeah, that'll keep happening. I actually, so yesterday was my last day at my last job, and I have this next week off, and then I'm starting a new job, and I was actually dreaming about going to the new job and like messing something up. And the funny thing is, I used to work at this company I'm going back to, and it's like they were all super pissed. Like, why'd you even come back? And I was like, oh my god, what a dream. Yeah, no, I feel you, man. It happens to me too all the time.
I mean, I've been doing this. I don't know if I should admit this, but I've been working in software for almost 20 years, and every time I change projects and go to something new, I swear I feel like I've taken a spike to the face, because I'm like, you have to learn everything over again. Everything's new. The problems are different.
Yeah.
You have to ask questions. So that's an entirely normal feeling to feel like, I've been doing this, like, especially when you've been doing it for years and you're like, why don't I know this, right?
Totally.
It's totally normal. It's just part of the process. So you know, that's not going to go away. Get used to it. Just ask questions. It's totally fine.
So my drivers are pretty crappy because, you know, as great as Linux is, sometimes the support isn't great. So I'm gonna probably use this weird, like, you know, setup view so it doesn't flicker and look terrible. The other thing I want to mention is, so far, what I've seen at least, I've been incredibly impressed. I know they have this slide here to tell you how awesome you are, but I'll be honest with you. I've been through another cohort completely through 6 months. I've subbed for several others, and you know, in the beginning, from what I remember, people have not been as confident as the group of people I've been working with so far. So this cohort is off to an amazing start. There's usually a lot of stragglers at this point already, and people starting to leave, and I don't know of anyone who's left yet, and that's fantastic. I'm not... This slide aside, this slide's stupid. I honestly do think you guys are doing a fantastic job, so even if you feel a little underwater right now, everyone's doing amazing, and this stuff is really hard, and the fact that I have so many students who are just killing it and just so confident is amazing. It's like a weird average thing, right? Where our average student is way better than the average of anything else we've seen, and we have some superstars out there, and I don't know of anyone who's like failing right now, right? I don't know of anyone who I can look at and go, maybe you shouldn't do this, and I've seen that before in other cohorts. Everyone here should be here, and everyone here is doing amazing. So keep it up. It's hard. It's hard. I'll reiterate again, like for like the 50th time, this is really hard. And it's stressful, and you have other lives to deal with. You know, you have your real job. Some of you have like a job during the day. Some of you have kids to take care of. Some of you have significant others, spouses, or whatever to do with, or dogs, or, you know, who knows, right? So it's a lot to add to your daily routine, I know, and it is stressful, but we'll make it through. So any other closing comments anyone has before we move on and we actually start class?
To piggyback on what she said, you know, I taught 5-year-olds for 33 years and retired from that. I'm the 5-year-old now.
the tables have turned.
Conceptually, I'm the 5-year-old because I want to learn, but I've got to be shown how, or show myself how, you know. So, and it's a very humbling experience. Definitely,
yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, it's the explain like I'm a 5 kind of thing, right? How do you explain HTML to a 5-year-old? And if you can explain it to a 5-year-old, you can explain it to anyone, right? Because you're all adults, so you can comprehend a lot more than a 5-year-old. So if we can explain it to a 5-year-old, we can explain it to you. Now, the problem is doing that in this kind of setting is very hard. It's probably not actually possible to explain code at all to a 5-year-old, but we could give it a shot and see what happens. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and talk about class today. We're going to be going over a little bit more with Bootstrap. So on Thursday and Wednesday, we went over the basics of Bootstrap as like a UI kit and a toolkit that you can use to plug and play and kind of get some pre-made CSS into your project, easily build stuff, easily use cool buttons and like alerts and all kinds of crazy things, right? And kind of bootstrap things a little bit easier. Today, we're going to talk a lot about layouts with Bootstrap, because one of the really powerful things that we haven't talked about much yet are the layouts. We all remember the floats exercise, and I've talked about this with my class several times and how it sucks, and no one ever wants to do it because it sucks. I hate floats. They're terrible. Really, it's just like the worst design anyone ever came up with. I don't even know. The person who did that is tripping or something. It's weird. So anyway, we're going to talk about a more sane layout system that Bootstrap gives you out of the box, which is really, really nice. Makes things a lot more powerful. Let's see if there's anything useful in these slides. Probably not. So, okay, we'll talk about Homework 1 and why Homework 1 sucked. Again, it was the layout, right? So the whole point of Homework 1 was, if you did the basic one, it was just mimicking this layout. And that is 90% of this homework, even in the more advanced one, or whatever you want to call it, right? The hard part is the layout. The colors, you don't even got to match them perfectly, right? You can kind of guess them. You can use little droppers. You can figure it out. It's kind of the easier part. Not all of it, but, you know, for the most part it is. But the layout's like getting the box in the center right here to be perfectly centered, and getting the, you know, header to look good and the footer to look good. Oh, God, it's just a pain, especially when you got to do it raw, with raw CSS. And The unfortunate thing is they're kind of leaving you to fend for yourself by teaching you the old float and kind of like the traditional block method stuff, because there's way easier ways to do it today. Bootstrap's one of them, but there's CSS grids and stuff that are just like a million times easier, which hopefully we'll get to talk about a little bit. But you know, it was hard, right? It wasn't an easy thing to do. I don't think anyone was like, yeah, this is a breeze. There was little things always that would stop you. But then we get this cool thing, Bootstrap, that you can come in and make this awesome layout in like a fraction of the time without really any headache at all. You don't have to make any CSS. You could do this whole thing out of the box. I mean, they don't give you a picture of a kid, but, you know, other than that, you can do pretty much all of this straight out of Bootstrap. So it's really nice. Obviously, we can all see the productivity benefits we get from that if we don't gotta waste hours upon hours, like finding the exact margins we need to put on some box that's down to the weird sub-percentage of something that just murders you, right? No one wants to do that ever again. I don't. It sucks. Yeah, it's not. So, Bootstrap, we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to do a little activity to remind us of Bootstrap. And there's two ways we can do this. Either one, I'll throw you to the wolves and you guys can do it for just a couple minutes. We can walk through it together. Together? People want to do it together? Seeing a lot of head shake. Okay. So why don't we do that? So first things first, I will open up getbootstrap.com. That's where you want to start, right? So we'll go ahead and go to get started. We'll just get ready. What's the first thing we're going to have to do? Copy to CDN? This is a trick question. I don't have any HTML, so where am I copying it from? I'm just kidding. I'm just being an asshole. Yeah, that's the first step. So let me go ahead and open up my VS Code. Let's see. Is this the right one? All right. I gotta open it up. I got it somewhere in here. Okay. First things first, we'll make an index.html, right? I'll blow this up a little bit. So one thing I taught, you know, my class that I don't know if Daniel shared Tuesday, Thursday, and in VS Code, if you do the command palette, there's an extension you can install to insert HTML snippets, and voila, you got that. So it's pretty nice. We use that in class because I'm too lazy to type out all this HTML. I don't think there's a reason to do so. So we're going to just go ahead and delete some of the boilerplate stuff that we don't need. Go ahead and go back to Get Bootstrap and let's copy that link. Oh my gosh. Oh, sweet, copy button. Should have noticed that. Where do we put it? In the head? Right under this meta? Yep, that'll do it. So now we have Bootstrap just magically in our project, which is awesome. And we can, this exercise is just to refamiliarize ourselves with adding Bootstrap and playing with components, so we can add whatever we want. So why don't we go ahead and add a button? Is this easy enough to see for everyone? Do I need to blow it up more? Good? Okay. So why don't we add a button? And this will be a bad button that no one wants. And then I'll just do a BR, separate things. And we'll give this some of the classes. We'll give it a button success. Make it look nice and cool. I'll let everyone kind of look at this. Good question. The extension is if you go to press Control-Shift or Command-Shift-X to open up the extensions panel here in Visual Studio Code, and you type in HTML snippet. You'll find HTML snippets right here. You want to install that, reload, and then you can get to those snippets that I used, in case you don't have that installed. Yeah, you can also do the exclamation point. It actually gives you a different snippet than this one. This one's a little bit more fleshed out. So that one doesn't include certain things in it. includes most of the stuff. Either one works great. Yes, you can also do, if you have an empty file, you can just do an exclamation point and tab, and voila, you have effectively the same thing. Anyway, we've got this HTML. I'm going to go ahead and open this in the browser, so let me open the folder. It's open with Chrome. So we have our bad button, which just looks like an ugly old button, and then our good button, which is this sick green one that has a little hand cursor, right? Well, we get this for free with Bootstrap. Yours didn't work. Why not? I guess you'd know. Let's look really quick.
Oh.
So this is basic Bootstrap, how you get it into your project. What else could we use? Danger? We could use Danger. Ooh, I like that. Let me open up that other HTML.
Oh, those are so nice.
Oops, caps on.
Will I mess it up?
I think so. It'll probably be fine. It just looks ugly. So let's add button Danger. Button Danger. I need my hyphen. Save it, and then I can go ahead and just refresh my Chrome. This is a dangerous button. Nice. Bootstrap, right? That's it. We've got it. We've got the power of Bootstrap in our fingertips now, right? It was that easy to get it in there. Figure out exactly how to use it is a different story, but if we look at some of the pre-made examples, you can see they have some other stuff we can use, like we can make the buttons large, you can make them small. There's other classes. There's also the Jumbotron, which is like that thing that you can scroll through and show pictures and all that stuff. You just assign it to a div. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do just by linking in Bootstrap. And the only real shared code we have is this bad boy right here, which is to the CDN link to the Bootstrap CSS, right? Any questions on the Bootstrap? Trevor?
So when you just did what you did,
yes,
in your class, and I get the link that, but when you're actually writing the button out, what part is Bootstrap and what part is what you're making up?
Ah, that's a good question. What part is Bootstrap and what part is just regular old HTML? These classes are from Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is like, you know when we make the external style sheets? Whatever.css? That's what Bootstrap is. It's that whatever.css. And we're just adding it directly in and we get access to these classes for free.
So when I'm doing whatever I want to do, I'm going to do it like normal, but I'm going to look for classes on Bootstrap.
Yes.
Make it look the way I want.
Yeah, so if you want to have the Bootstrap functionality, you just add these classes, yeah.
So you're looking for classes.
You're looking for classes. And that's what the Bootstrap code will tell you. So if you go to the page, right here, and you actually go look at the components, it'll tell you the classes. So there's an alert class, alert primary, and that basically translates to this bad boy, this div with the blue color and the blue text, right? Secondaries right here, success, danger, warning, so on and so forth. And so all of these components and buttons are on here, are shown, and then it shows you the classes that you need to use, and that's how you use Bootstrap effectively.
You knew that class name is on top of the button tab.
Yeah, I knew some of the classes off the top of my head because I've used Bootstrap a little bit professionally. Any other questions on this? Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about grid layouts and how the grid layout works in Bootstrap. So let me open up the slides. So again, here's some example of using the Jumbotron. I don't know why it, like, weird. Oh yeah, another benefit of Bootstrap that I keep forgetting to mention is the mobile responsiveness. So these days we all know that on mobile sites there's a lot of, everything's viewed on mobile effectively at one point or another. And you can imagine Well, if you've looked at your basic layouts, some of them might not scale well on mobile. So you go to mobile and things are just kind of weird. Maybe they're too big, maybe they're too small. It's hard. It's really hard to tell. There's a lot you have to do to make the mobile responsiveness thing, work well with your CSS. But with Bootstrap, you get that for free. Bootstrap knows how to handle smaller browsers, larger browsers. You can do all kinds of stuff to make it change the layout as the browser gets smaller or larger, so on and so forth. So you get that for free as well, which is a really important thing today to have, because so many people are using their phones for everything, right? So we already did the warm-up. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the grid layout. And I would take a breath because we're about to get into a really long explanation about how the grid layouts work. Okay, it's super important that you understand this. It's not the most difficult thing we're gonna do, but it is important that we know it, right? So this is probably the most important thing we're gonna cover in terms of CSS, is how to do layouts well, and using it with Bootstrap. You're gonna be using Bootstrap effectively the rest of the class, so you really want to understand how these grids work and how these layouts work. And again, it's not really that hard. So one of the things you'll probably notice if you go to effectively any web page today is that it's very grid-like, right? When you see how images are laid out, or how a header, you'll have like a header with the nav section and then a body and then like a footer, and then you might have subsections of the body, right? And so it looks like a grid, and you can kind of make it a grid in your head if you were to break things down, right? So if you were able to just take some lines and kind of put it over to sketch the web page, you'd be able to see this grid-like layout on almost everything that looks good. And the reason why is it's super easy to take these grids and change their shape and their layout and all that to different sizes of browsers, right? If you kind of have this weird like amorphous layout, it'll just do whatever it does. Also, CSS is very, with the box model, is very apt to this kind of grid setup, right? Because you've got a bunch of boxes that you're building, so you might as well make one box and separate that box into smaller boxes. It's just kind of the natural way to go about doing CSS, and it's definitely the case on any well-designed professional website, right? So Facebook does have a decent grid-like setup. You can see up here at the top, you have like a header, and then you have the full body, and then you have your footer, and inside the body there's like a grid sections, and if you could draw, you can see there's a grid right here, there's subgrids like right here. This is probably part of a grid. You have the side stuff, the menu navigation, part of a grid, right? And you can kind of break it down. If you could draw lines over it, you'd see that kind of grid layout. And there's also more complicated grids that are kind of harder to see intuitively, but they still exist to an extent. Even on like The Guardian, right? The Guardian has it. It's harder to just see where the grid exists, but if you were to look at the code and look at the source and break it down and kind of do it yourself, you'd see it. What's up?
The example you're showing, the grid is vertical?
Yeah.
Or horizontal?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This grid is vertical. We're only showing the vertical grid, but yeah, there's also a horizontal grid. There's rows. The idea of rows. Columns and rows, right? So the rows, again, maybe would be the header, maybe that ad, right? And then website of the year, whatever, like kind of the date. These are all potentially different rows. Or maybe those three, the header, that ad, and that date, maybe that's one row that's separated into sub-rows, right? And then the Guardian and all those links, maybe that's another row. And then the content, that's another row. And those are split into sub-rows as well within their own sub-grids. And so the whole grid, subgrid, rows, sub-rows, so on and so forth, that's also very important because not everything can be built as one grid. Maybe you'll have one very coarse grid, and they get finer and finer as you get down into content, right? So that's also another way to look at it. Find the outline grid and think about your website initially as one giant grid and try to break it down from there. And it'll get more complex as you get into smaller, more isolated components, but try not to think about all of the grids and subgrids at once. Start from big, kind of come out with your basic layout, got a header, got a footer, got content, and then go in from there, right? And we're going to see that as we go over more examples. CNN still has a grid, right? Again, these ones are a little bit more advanced, so it's a little bit looser, the concept of a grid, but it's still there. And if you were to look at the source and you were to talk to the designers or whatever, you'd be able to see that they have this idea of a grid to some regard in this website. And as it scales, as it changes on your mobile browser, so on and so forth, you'll still see that kind of shape following suit with the grid, right?
Is that grid more designed for complete accessibility across devices going this way?
Yeah, so, well, going vertically, I don't know. That's a good question. I would say rows going horizontal is actually a better way. You start with the rows, and then you work with columns in the rows. And that's like how Bootstrap works. You have a set of rows, and then you work with so many columns within a row. Because the rows are going to be easier to scale in terms of height and stuff as you change the width of your browsers and all that. Or you can keep them the same if you change the width really wide and the height, you shrink it. Whereas the columns, if you just have more free-floating columns, it's kind of harder to track that across width. So, because rows generally are 100% width, right? So, it makes it easier to start with the row. So, it's interesting that they have the examples as like vertical bars, when realistically, I think what's probably more important would be horizontal bars to start with, and then you can go into the vertical subsections like the columns after that. So there's lots of tools to be able to sketch this kind of stuff and build UIs. Not all of them offer you the ability to use Bootstrap. I'm not sure if any of them really do have Bootstrap built in, but a really good one that we'll eventually use later in class is Balsamiq. You'll get a key to be able to use this, but it's a tool used professionally to do mock-ups and UI design and wireframes and all that stuff. You could also just use a pen and paper. We could use the board up here and kind of do like an example wireframe. You know, there's lots of ways that we could do a wireframe. You're not really limited to anything, but if you want to keep it virtual, you can use Balsamiq. Another one that we use is called InVision, or I did use at work since I quit, I guess. InVision is pretty good, and InVision has a nice new feature that they added where you can actually create it with a mockup and export HTML, so that's also pretty nice. Granted, we never used that HTML, but either way, there's lots of tools to do this, is the point. Other than just using a pen and paper if you want to do it like the old school way, right? So we're going to learn a little bit now about rows and columns and how those work, because they're quite interesting. Whenever you start a website, you generally start with like basic layout, right? Well, let's go ahead and put it in presentation mode. You generally, oh man, come on. That's going to be all weird. Sorry, guys. Yeah, see, it does not like that. It is terrible, isn't it?
Wow. It's a rave.
Let me just scroll down manually to where we were at. Heyo! Hey, I did it! Look at that. Nice. Okay. Yeah, so it's fun, right? I want to go through it for just a couple of slides, though, so bear with me. When you start with web designs, in the very beginning, you'll do a wireframe, kind of come up with the basic idea, but you want to break it down into that rows and that columns idea. Woo, that's crazy. So right here, there's clearly a delineation of rows and columns. All right, we can see that we're setting you up for an activity where we're gonna decide how many rows and columns are in here. So how many rows do people think exist in this? Try to count them up. 7, 6, 3. Okay, lots of varying answers. So someone who says 7, why 7?
Header and footer.
Header, okay, and footer, that's 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the center blocks, right? Someone who said 3, why do you think 3?
Because the header is 1, the main content is 1, and the footer is 1.
Okay. Any other answers? Cool. Well, those were both great answers. Technically, in the Bootstrap example, after we get through this rave, is 6. And I really didn't like this when I looked over the slides. I was like, this is kind of stupid. And the reason why it's 6 is navbars aren't considered part of the main container in Bootstrap. They're their own thing, so you don't count them as a row. It's a row. Like, let's be real. So there are 7, but in the Bootstrap world, there's actually only 6. So when you're counting them in Bootstrap and how many row classes you're going to have, row divs, there's only going to be 6. Each one of these subsections is its own, and then the footer is 1, right? So the 3 is actually an interesting one. You could technically do that, and it wouldn't be a bad design. The question is, do you need to? That's the question you have to ask when you're building your content. So you might have a really good reason. In that basic portfolio that we're doing, absolutely, I think 3 or 2 or whatever makes a lot of sense. And then you can do sub-rows inside this main content. And that is totally valid. It would be easy to do, be pretty clean. It's a great answer as well. 7 also works. If you want to do your header in a row, absolutely go ahead and do it. No one's gonna stop you. It's not gonna change anything, right? Okay, we're done with that. So let's look at another example that gets a little bit more complicated. That is the same one. I don't know why they gave me the same slide. Okay, so let's look at a little bit more interesting example of the breakdown, right? So how many rows do we think are going to be in this bad boy? 5? How are you counting that? So footer, content, the awesome stories header, doing 5. Now remember, Bootstrap, we're not going to count the header. You still think it's 5? It's 4. So if you didn't count the header, then yeah. Does everyone get why this is 4? Everyone kind of starting to see this breakdown here?
Well, they're looking at the top as a given.
Yeah. So they're looking at that header as like a given in Bootstrap because there's actually a navbar class that you can use that sits outside of your container class. And then there's columns broken down inside of the rows, right? So there might be 1 column in this top one, 2 columns in the middle one, and 1 column in the footer. It's not super important how many columns you have, honestly. It's more important how many rows you have. Like I was saying with those grid layout examples we were looking at earlier, we care about the rows because they're way harder to deal with. They have to do with the full width of the page, so you're going to have more scaling with the width, so you have to kind of account for that. Columns you can wrap and do all kinds of crazy stuff with if the width changes. So columns, not super important, but it's good to see how you could break it down into different columns, right? So there could be even more columns here somehow. There could be like a little third one in between the picture and stuff that doesn't do anything but adds space. I mean, it's possible. So let's look at another example. This one's even more complicated. How many rows do you think are here? 6? So 5, 6, 5, 6. Anyone want to count out what they're thinking? Greatest website 1. Photos 2. Content of photos 3. Greatest website 4. Is 5. And then footer 6. Anyone else think a different number? Yeah? 5? Where did you count the 5? Yeah?
You have the greatest website ever.
Okay.
The picture and the text below it are going to be on 1 row.
I think that's going to be 1 row? Okay.
And greatest website ever, then the sub-content.
Okay. And then the footer, okay. What about the greatest website ever, pictures and content, greatest website ever and content, and the footer? Could you do that too? Obviously, there's a lot of variability in how you can do the rows. And it depends a lot on what you want to see. Now, why might you have your photos and your content under the photos in 1 row?
So they line up.
So they line up, yeah?
When you scale, they stay with each other.
So when you scale, they stay with each other? Yeah, both of them are absolutely true. You want them to line up. So you're going to want clean column delineation, right? And if you have it over multiple rows, you don't get that. If you have, if you want them to scale with each other as you change the width of the screen, and you want the content to be right under the exact photo it belongs to, you want them kind of paired together. So you're gonna want them in the same row for sure, and then you got to find some way to get them in the same column, and the only way to do that is put them in the same row, right? So you need them in the same row. What about the greatest website ever made? The content under that. Why would you want that in 1 row as opposed to 2? Yeah, it's a trick one because honestly, it depends. Depends on what you want. If they both have a single column, I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? It depends on how much space you want between rows, when you scale, stuff like that. So that one can kind of be at your discretion, but having it in 1 row isn't a bad thing because it's going to stay close to each other, right? So column breakdowns. And this is the conclusion we came up to as a class, right? How are we going to want to break down these columns? We're obviously going to want the pictures with their content in kind of the same column to make things nice and easy for scalability and all of that fun stuff. So let's see, let's go through. We have a couple more examples I want to go over. Okay, got another one. Anyone have any idea how many rows could be in this bad boy? 2? 2, 3? Okay, so I'm assuming if we did 2, it's the content in the footer, right? If we do 3, it's the awesome photos header, content in the footer, right? That's my guess. That one's kind of hard. It could be 3, it could be 4. In this case, they do 4, right? And let's see, what else do we got to do to get this done? Okay, so there's columns. How many columns do we have? Potentially 2. So this one's really interesting that they have the 2 columns here in that sub row, that second row, the content under the photo here. You can have these in 1. That's probably how I would have done it too, and then just broke them down by columns. But maybe that would have dug me into a ditch. But then the other thing you've got to think about is, how do you get the sub-content to line up? Well, this is where the whole idea of subgrids comes into play. So now we have not only a column inside of a row or 2, but now we have rows inside of those columns, and then we can even take it further and put columns inside of those rows, right? So we have all of these little sub-photos right here next to the big photo. Each individual set of photos has its own row, and then inside of that row, you have another breakdown of columns. So, layouts. Any questions on layouts so far that we've seen? This is basic layout stuff. This isn't necessarily how it works in Bootstrap yet. The idea of rows and columns works like this in Bootstrap, but the technical of, well, how do I get those rows and how do I get those columns hasn't been explained yet. But in the sense of grids and columns, how are people feeling? Fist of 5 out of 5. How are people feeling? Pretty good. Wow, that's pretty good. Nice. Okay. So now, how do you do it with Bootstrap? That's the question on everyone's mind, right? This is the real where the money is, because you're like, okay, great, you told me how to do a layout, kind of intuitive to some regard, right? That's awesome, but how do I actually do it? It can be a little tricky, but honestly, the thing is, Bootstrap makes this way easier than you can ever do, which is raw CSS, right? Well, that was true for a while. CSS grids kind of changed that, but effectively, it's the case, right? It's a little easier to do it with Bootstrap. It's a lot easier to do it with Bootstrap. Tricky is kind of it depends on how you view it. If it's tricky, it can be hard to get things to scale exactly how you want, and so you got to play with it a lot to get things to look just the right way. But for the most part, it is so much easier, and it's pretty straightforward, right? So we have this grid again, okay? And so in this one we had, what, 4 columns? Or 4 rows with the header, the 2 picture sections, and then the footer, right? So Bootstrap has this idea of 12 columns within a row. So it's really easy to build a row. It's really easy to build kind of the Bootstrap layout. So you start with something called a container. Where the hell is the eraser? Okay, so in Bootstrap, now I'm just going to do it in HTML on the screen. It's way easier. Let me go ahead and here's a little example. Cool. So we're going to go ahead and just get rid of all of this content. So in Bootstrap, when we want to do a layout, my God, I thought it would be easier. You want to do a layout, you need this container, okay? So Bootstrap has rows and columns, and that's all well and good, but to even get those to work, you need a container. And that's always a div. Container. Once you're inside the container, you can start working with the rows and columns. So again, to start, the easiest thing, the thing you want to do first is the row, and Bootstrap even knows that, right? So you get another class called row. Now columns, how do columns work in Bootstrap? Bootstrap has this idea of 12 columns in a row, okay? You can split up those columns however you would like, but there's got to be some set of 12. So at the end of the day, you're going to have something that adds up to 12. To do a full width, you would obviously make your column width 12. To make a half width, your column width would be 6. To make a quarter width, you know, it'd be 3. To make a third width, it'd be 4, right? You guys see the picture. It's 12. However you want to split it up, it's 12. If I want 3 columns, they all need to be a size of 4. So how do you do that? They have another set of classes. Starts with call, C-O-L, like column, and then you do a hyphen. Then there are different sizes. There's LG for large. There's MD for medium. There's SM for small and XS for extra small, right? And what these mean are large is like I'm on a large screen, okay? So I'm just really wide screen. Like this one's pretty big. I could probably use large columns, and we'll play with large columns for now since we're all on our laptops. We have something that's large, right? If we wanted to go medium, say the screen is, you know, only 1080 pixels wide, right? Maybe that's medium. Maybe it's only 760 pixels wide. Maybe that's a small. Maybe it's only 480 pixels wide, like an iPhone or something. Maybe that's extra small, right? And you can tell it what you want these columns to be for certain screens, and how you want them to scale for certain screens. So if you have extra small columns, they're going to stay in their column sections for smaller screens. If you have large columns, if we did 12 individual large columns, as the screen gets smaller, there's a smaller width for those columns before they start wrapping, right? So you'll put in the columns, and then boom, they'll start wrapping sooner. It's not super important yet, but just know that it's column, dash, and then you have the size. Always 2 letters. In this case, LG, dash. And then the last thing is, does anyone have a guess? How many columns? The starting column? So you're all really close. It's the width of this particular column. So if we wanted to make it the full width, it would be 12. So that's a full width column. Takes up the whole thing. And we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and open this up in a little moment just to see what it looks like. Okay, so let me open the containing folder. Let's go ahead and open it with Chrome. So there's no content in there. Let me go ahead and add some content. Generally, you got to get content in there for it to actually expand. Okay, so that's the quote-unquote full width of the container. Now, you may say that's not technically the full width, and that's true. It's not technically. But that's because the container comes with built-in margins separating it from the width of the page. You don't always want the full width to go literally the full width. You'll notice if you go to GitHub or whatever and you open it up on a big screen, you'll have like a center section that's what's rendered. The rest of it's just white space. Kind of the same concept, right? Bootstrap does that for you. So let's see something that's not necessarily full width. Let's break it down by halves. Well, we need to start with a row again. You can put it in the same container. And we can go ahead and make this 6 instead of 12, right? Now, what do we need to do to get the other half? Create another column of what, 6? 12? Was it 6? Alright, let's see. It wrapped. And I'll show you why. Does anyone have a guess? Screen's too small?
Box form instead of inlay form?
It's because I had large columns in a small screen. So now you can see that they're actually taking up the halves, right? So if you want to see a clearer delineation, or actually I could probably change this too. Let's go ahead and try these with medium columns. And if one of you could let me know what time this exercise is supposed to be done. Because I'm just going to kind of go. Give me like a 5-minute warning, unless I'm already at the 5 minutes. Okay, will you just remind me at 11? Okay, because I want to cover this as much as I possibly can. Alright, so let's make a medium. Looks like medium probably wasn't small enough. See, at what point does it wrap? Okay, so it unwraps there. So let's make them small so you can see, if I want to see, oh, say, this is the size that my web page is mostly going to be. I want to make sure I always have these columns. There we go, small columns. Don't wrap. So this is how the size works, right? And if we want to make this, what was that? If I stretch out my page now, that's a good question. What happens? They take up the whole page. So if your content can fit in a small container, there's no reason why you have to make every container large. If a content can only fit in a large container, well then you want it to be large because you want it to scale appropriately with the page, right? And how do we make this? I'll make this a little clearer, so I'll do border thin solid black. I'll just add this real quick so that we can kind of see where these re-render. So you can see right there, that's where the columns break down, right? So let's go ahead and do it again. Let's take this row. Let's make them even smaller. Let's make them 3.
You're at 5 minutes, and then we'll have a 5-minute discussion.
Okay. Let's make this yellow. And let's refresh. Now I only have 2. It was my mistake, but it's pretty easy. Get those other 2 in. Right? Is this starting to make sense? How this bootstrap columns and rows and all this work? It's fairly intuitive at first, right? It's really not so bad. Now, obviously, you have the question of, well, what if I want space between my rows or something like that? Well, those are different questions. And that comes back down to your raw CSS. If I want margin between rows, I can go ahead and add that. And it's actually pretty easy to add that in. So if we were to have an external style sheet, you could go ahead and link to that, but for brevity's sake and for time, I'm going to go ahead and just add a style tag here. And I can actually take the .row class that already exists in Bootstrap, and I can add a margin bottom of 10 pixels. Now I've got space, right? It's nice, huh? It's pretty easy to do. So this is an interesting point back to the specificity of, oops, I don't know what I just pressed. Back to the specificity of, what is going on? There's a weird menu on my screen. Sorry, I have no idea where it came from. And I don't know how to turn it off. Woo. Yeah. Okay, anyway. So this is that specificity of classes and how a class can override other parameters of another class if they don't intersect or something. And in this case, the row doesn't have any margin, so we can just add it on later. If we wanted to do our borders for our columns, we could. You could do like a general selector or whatever for anything column and try to add a border. So any questions on these layouts? People starting to get a feel for how they work? Question, yeah? What was happening? How do you get them side by side, like these test tabs? Either are you using column smalls, column extra smalls? Because if you have the size is different depending on the size of your browser, it'll change how they stack or if they're next to each other. So I can actually crush this in a little bit, and you'll see now they start stacking. So this is that wrapping behavior that I said with different widths that comes into play. So hey, our browser is way too small, it's not wide enough, we can't display all of this content next to each other anymore because they're small columns and not extra small columns. We need to go ahead and change that, right? Okay. So what we're going to do for the next couple of minutes is talk to the people around you and kind of discuss these columns and these rows and these layouts a little bit more, discuss how you could build a complicated layout using containers, rows, and columns, discuss what happens when browsers change, just kind of talk about this stuff amongst yourselves for about 5 minutes, and then we'll talk a little bit about it together. Oh, instead of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
Covered there's like these exercise they're doing now, and then I think your demo sort of covered the next few things after that. So I think they can probably go into double check the slides.
I'll probably do a little bit more with it after this, give it like another 5-10 minutes, just so they get more comfortable.
Yeah,
Since I did.
I think you have about maybe 15 minutes of the demo that you've already done that was behind this activity.
Yeah, I effectively skipped the slides and got straight to the demo.
Yeah.
Slide switches.
I'm getting that feel from you.
Yeah. So, I mean, frankly, this is what the slides are showing. I'm just showing them how to do it,
You
right?
absolutely have. You're absolutely right. And it's probably better for them to see you do it and the effects it has live than to try to decipher it from your slides. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you
I
guys.
just think we're further ahead than what I quoted.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, I'll cover it a little bit more, and then they can go ahead and do their activity. We'll give them a little bit longer to do the activity too. Maybe we'll give them an extra 10 minutes because we don't got a break until noon. So.
Yeah, we got it. I think, I don't know if you were still here when he did it, but last weekend they sort of started the activity and then let them go.
Okay. You launched the activity. Yeah. What's going on, man?
Are you going to teach him Flexbox?
If they teach it in the class, it's a little bit later. But I mean, we've got a lot of. If we've got time at the end, I can teach them whatever.
I know Bootstrap 4 is all about Flexbox and stuff.
Right.
I was just curious because I know like all their examples are like Bootstrap 3, so I was just curious.
Yeah, if they say anything Bootstrap 3 related, I'm just gonna ignore it because we're using 4. Literally, no one uses 3 anymore, or they might, but if they didn't upgrade, right? It's not what you're gonna find. They're not gonna be able to get 3 unless they dig for it. So.
Then once you finish that row, the next row, so outside the first
Like here?
it's still inside the row. Right. We did and then inside that we did row. And then do whatever you need to do inside the column inside. And then once you finish with that row, close the div and you make another row. Inside that row, it won't show you anything. Put it inside that row and open up the column. Even if you leave it green, it's just going to show up.
I hadn't even left the code. It's just like popping up. I don't even think it has anything to do with it. It's just popping up on my
Make another row, and then
Yeah, that makes sense.
but you could, so the max size of that thing is 12, so you could even like offsize it. Either like one is 4, the other is like 8.
We all
Right, like if you made one 4.
So it's always 12?
Always 12.
Yeah.
Always some additive of 12.
It's 12 for
So like clean your section and all the formatting. Next section, column format.
What's 12? 12 is the weight, right?
Yeah.
And then that's the end of the container.
Yep. Yep.
Is 12 just like the width? Or like what is 12 to?
I don't know. That's a great question. There's probably some reasoning behind it. It's probably just an easily divisible, and it's large enough that you can divide it in so many ways that you can make nice layouts, right? So it's a complex enough number to deal with most layouts, but it's simple enough that it's not hard to understand.
You could theoretically make like one column 4 and the other one 8. And they could still...
Yep, absolutely. You can. There's even this idea of column offsets. So you can say offset by 2 and then start a column that's 10. So it's like got 2 spaces of blank before a 10 column width.
I mean, the coding even is so if you're not so I'm wondering like you were saying, so that it's complex enough number you have enough space across your pages, right? But easily enough divisible by to get to what separately it's really hard in the eyes.
Yeah.
Hey Carson, divs are block out, aren't they?
Yes.
Okay, but then when you add the bootstrap classes, does it become an inline?
It probably uses, in this one it uses flex. It's a good question. We can cover it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. What's up?
I wanted to get it side by side,
Okay.
like with the example. They're all stacked on top of each other.
Okay.
I don't know where in the code from that is to get them to go left to right.
Okay.
That's basically what I'm trying to do.
You have a row inside of a row right here, it looks like?
Yes.
You don't want that.
No.
The rows need to be separated from each other. You're gonna want to probably take that stuff out and move it up inside of the container.
Okay.
Because it looks like what you're running into is you have rows inside of rows inside of rows, and they're classing themselves.
Okay. So you know how we move them into the container?
Yeah.
I thought everything was in the container.
Technically it is, right? But you have this top level row, and then you have a row inside of it. You need to end this row and move this row out of that row, so that they're directly under the container.
Okay. So what would I do then? Try to leave again?
So put another ending div tag right underneath this row.
So you had the same problem twice. I caught the first one, but I didn't notice the other one at the top.
And then at the very end, go ahead and delete one of the ending div tags. You're gonna need to do. So now if we were to, we should change cycles. Refresh your page. You need an ending div tag there, so one of them there. There's some disconnect somewhere here, where there's too many rows nested in rows. So you can see this row here. This row ends column well, so this is the ending for this row, right? Then this row starts, you need to find the end for it. You need to outdented one. So the problem is you have this row and this row, like you don't want that, right? So I would start, what I would do is I would start fresh, okay? Because it's going to be really hard to fix this. Create a container component. In that container, create 4 divs, and give each one of those divs a row class, but do not put them inside of each other. Make sure they're only in the container, okay?
Separate.
Yep, okay, so do your closing tag for your container. Okay. You also do your closing tags for anything else. So inside of there, do 4 more divs, each one with the class of row, they're all separate, yeah. Yeah, and then copy that 3 more times. Outdent all of those. So highlight all of those rows and hit Shift Tab. So they're all the same length. Now tab. Oh, actually Shift Tab a bunch of times so they're all lined up, right? One more. Okay, so now do tab. Tab. Okay, now they're all properly aligned. So in there, now you can add your colors. If you do it now, it'll work.
Now it'll work? Okay. Thank you. We were stuck back there.
Yeah, and HTML gets hard when you get all nested. Okay, alright. Let's go ahead and talk about this a little bit. Or not. That's fine too. Alright, let's talk about this a bit. Hopefully everyone got their questions answered, or at least experimented a bit with it. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at some more examples of how this works. So one thing I did, the little CSS trick, is I added some slightly more advanced selectors here. So we have all of these column dashes, right? And I want to put borders around every single one of them without having to do a bunch of work. I actually created a selector right here where we have a div that has a class that starts with, that's what the caret equals, column dash. Every time I have a class that starts with column dash, I can give it a border. And then for all of the different sizes, starts with column dash large dash, I can make it red, medium green, small yellow, extra small blue, right? So that's kind of how I did some more advanced CSS to make this stuff work. Okay, let me open up. So on getbootstrap.com, if you go ahead and go to the documentation, and you go to layout, and you go to grid, you can kind of see a breakdown of all of the stuff we've just done together, you guys looked at together and played with, and we can find the actual docs that can explain everything we could possibly do, right? So this, it tells you the sizes of screens too. So small is greater than 576, greater than or equal to 576 pixels, where medium is greater than or equal to 768. So between those two numbers, you have the small columns, right, where they won't collapse upon each themselves, right? They'll still be wide. So extra small changed actually. It's just column dash. So if I go ahead and I go back to, that explains why my example didn't work. I was wondering that. I can just copy this really quick.
Well, then your top one.
Yeah, but I can put that CSS in here, and it'll be it should be overridden by all of these other guys. Oops. Alright. If I go ahead and open that again, let's make sure this works. I was wondering what was going on. There we go. We have our extra smalls. Anyways, if you want to look at the documentation to see exactly how this Bootstrap stuff works, getbootstrap.com, docs 4.1, layout, grid. This bad boy right here tells you pretty much everything you need to know. The total number of columns, the width of those gutters on each side, whether you can nest them, ordering, so on and so forth, how to properly get the sizes, gives you some example layouts right here, right? And you can literally copy these snippets into your code to get started if you needed to for different columns. There's even equal width columns, right? That you could just put call in there and it takes care of it for you. There's all kinds of different rules about how you can use Bootstrap, and this is how you find out. This is where you go if you want to see everything you do with layouts. And to be completely honest, I don't know everything you can do with layouts anymore. They keep adding more and more, making it more sophisticated. I just know the basic set of 12, which is arguably the most important thing you need to know. So let's go ahead and pull that back up. Let's put these in. Now again, if we want to see different sizes and what happens as it gets wider, those greens are mediums, right? The red is large, the yellows are smalls, and the blues, the horrible, horrible blue, is the extra smalls. And you can see at the points where they start wrapping. And you can start to see those extra smalls, they never wrap. They go on forever. You can start to see how flexible this system gets, right? Yeah, so it can only do so much. If you have extra smalls and you have 6 of them on this really tiny screen, like, that's on you, man. So, you're on your own. But you can imagine, for the most part, you can take care of this, right? It's pretty easy. Does anyone have any more questions on this, like, container layout that we've got going on? Do we want to kind of, yeah?
I just saw that when you did the whole classes and you said starts with the caret. Is that part of regex that you're able to use there, or is that just the only?
Yeah, so it's this one is literally a starts with. I'm pretty sure starts with selector. So is it derived from a regex? Probably, but it's not a literal regex. No, it's just a starts with. There probably is a regex selector that you can use. I'm sure if you want to get into that. And we'll talk about regexes later. So that's a great question. But there are ways that you can match text in a more sophisticated way. Anyway, any questions on the container and the layout stuff? Did anyone, anything that's still not quite jiving for anyone that they want answered, or another example they'd like to go through? Yeah?
So if a small container works on any browser setting, let's say Chrome or whatever, why use that, or why use a large over a small?
Why use a large over small? That's a good question. So the question was basically, if the small works on effectively everything because it's so small, why would you ever use a large over a small? The question is the size of the content. So sometimes there's content that you never want it to be able to be in a column form on certain sizes, right? So you might have a background image that you always want to be a full width. And could you use a single small, a size 12 small? Yeah, you could, but it kind of defeats the purpose. I mean, you want it to be large. It's more of like a semantic thing, I'd say, than anything. So you can do it however you like, and if it works, it works. But for something that is large, legitimately, and supposed to be displayed on a large screen, I would just use the large column. You can also do they have the auto column stuff, so kind of take care of it for you, which I don't know much about, but as you read through the docs more, you can figure how you'd like to use it, right? Yeah, Trevor?
So, that's all cool if you just want a box or a row, but like, when I'm maybe I'm getting ahead, but I'm thinking about our homework where we've got a picture, and then the text that's here, and the rest, it's not really.
So like a sub-container kind of?
Just plain box.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it has the picture with the text around it and stuff?
Right, and so when it wraps like that, box instead of box, but then.
Right.
Like, it just doesn't seem as clean and neat as that, so maybe I'm getting ahead.
Okay, so why don't we try to do something similar to that? And we won't get an exact comparison, but we can try, right? So I'm gonna make a special class. It's gonna be, I'm just gonna call it content so that we can override the background. Or actually, I'll just go ahead and get rid of the background. That works too. Blue's hideous anyway. All right. So let's make another row. And let's make this one just a large column, right? Or let's just see what, yeah, we'll make it a large column for now. I don't want to deviate too much. We'll make it the full 12, okay? Alright, so let's get it on the page. So the content, it's probably not a 12 for that, right? Since we have a smaller page, I'm actually going to go back to small, and I'm going to go ahead and do a 6 because we want it to take about half of the page. And let's say we want to have it in the middle, right? So in Bootstrap 3, we'll see if this still works, otherwise I might have to go to the docs. Nope, that didn't work. Is that the, what's the class?
It's yeah, it's not right there, but you don't have to make it more than you can apply it to the same.
Okay. So offset 3 like so?
Yep.
Come on, buddy. I don't know why it's not working.
When you did it last, when you separated, there was like a border on the last three.
What was that?
Is there supposed to be a hyphen after the three?
No, there shouldn't be a hyphen. Good time to dive into the docs. Offsetting columns. Ah, it's just offset. There we go. Okay, so we change this slightly to offset.
Offset sides.
Okay, so they changed that from version 3 to version 4. Nice. Okay, so now we have our content that's centered effectively. And you'll notice too that my CSS doesn't work anymore because it doesn't start with the call small. Okay, that starts with the literal start with the first class Ajax. Anyway, so now we have our content that's centered, right? So this is sort of how our homework works, where we have a centered content. It might be a little bigger than that. You know, whatever. It depends, but this is kind of what we got. And inside of here, we could definitely add some more rows. I don't think you need another container. So we start getting into nested stuff. Which makes it really tricky, right? And let's go ahead and add a div class. We'll make this column small and 12, and we'll just make 2 of these. 1 in this first row. So this is more of like an example of subgrids than it is what you're asking about. What you're asking about is just fluid content inside of one column, effectively. And so the way you would have to do it is you'd have one column, kind of similar to how we have, you know, just the column offset, the size width 6, offset 3, right? And in there you could put your content and you do inline content and you could have it wrap around the image. It's different CSS. But you can see inside of a single row, you can do sub-rows and then subgrids. And the size rules still apply. So because that main component is already width of 6, the small columns inside of it are still a width of 6, so they obviously have to wrap, right? But if I made them a width of 3, most likely, oh, I made them a width of 12. If I made them a width of, let's see if it scales appropriately. Okay, yeah, so it's a small inside of a small. So you can pretty easily subgrid things, and so that'll help somewhat, right? So what it'll do is it'll help you take your initial content that has your image and then your text wraps around it. You could do a break in there, and then you can have another row that has like images, or you have that other sub box that's like got the icons for GitHub and all that stuff in Stack Overflow. You can start to sub content that up and sub row with subgrids and all that, and you can make it a little bit easier for yourself. So this is still a little cleaner than that, because that's kind of one block with some just free-flowing text, which is a different CSS thing altogether. But if you have one row with one column, okay, you can put all of that content in there and then just do your inline styling. So not an exact answer to what you were asking, because that's different CSS, and I want to go over the grids more. But it led into this whole idea of being able to build subgrids to help you get there. So if there's a way you can grid that stuff up, it's going to make it easier. There's not a way you can do it, well then we're working with like inline styles and stuff, and or the inline spans and stuff like that, or p tags to get it to work. Yeah, question?
So each container can be divided into 12 grids. Essentially, is that right?
Okay, that's a good question. So the container actually has no concept of division, except for rows. So you can put it as many rows in a container as you'd like. Okay, so the container starts as just like, how can we change this horizontally? Add rows. The horizontal rows have a division of 12 columns.
Okay. So like, if you were to do say 2 for your content 1, content 2, 3, 4, you just shrink that even smaller, or is it still staying that third pixel?
So if we change this to 2, it does make it smaller, because there's subsections of 12 inside of that row. You had a question?
No, what? I'm just saying that. So your first container is taking the first row of 12, and it's only using 6. But then once you get inside of that, the nested section goes back to a full set of 12.
Yes.
You're not giving up the remaining 6.
Yes, you're correct. Exactly. Each row has its own set of 12 that it works with. Container is just cares about rows, really. So inside that container, you just put all your different rows. Inside the rows, you have 12. Do with what you want those 12. And then once you add another row, even inside of a column, or even if you did a subcontainer, you get the fresh 12. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could go down, infinitely small. You wouldn't get much out of it, but you could do it, right? If you wanted to do pixel by pixel graphics, you could do that with Bootstrap. That's like the most ineffective way to do it. You had a question over there?
Yeah, how does the container, how does that link to the example we showed minutes ago with the picture in the red row?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Like on the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I like that question. So right here, where would our container be?
The whole thing.
The whole thing? Yeah.
Well, except for the nav bar, but
You could do it in the whole thing and put the nav bar in there as its own row, or you can have the nav bar and then a container underneath it. So to answer that question, your container is probably everything in the red here. And then inside of that container, we have a row component, potentially a row here, or you could have these as one row and a row component. Inside of there, you have a column component and a column component. Inside there, we have another set of rows, right? So this is where this is subdivided into rows. So say we had row, 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 and then a column. Inside of this column, we now have one row, two rows, and then these are just the full 12, right? Inside of that row. In here, we have row, 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 4 rows inside of this column. And inside of there, we have 2 columns of 6, and then a column of 12 inside of those sub-rows. Starting to make a little bit of sense? How you can break this down? Yeah, so there's obviously a lot you can do. And you can break down the rows and columns in an infinite number of ways. Really, the point of it is they give you an easier way to like build a generic layout quickly, so you don't have to do the weird float stuff to make this work. Because can anyone off the top of their head tell me what they'd have to do with floats to get that to work? I can't, and I'm not even gonna try. So, yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah. So that'd be nasty, right? But we can do it a lot easier with Bootstrap. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do an activity. So I will tell the Tuesday, Thursday class, the Monday, Wednesday class, we actually make them go out to the GitLab repo and download the activities themselves, so they all have it cloned. I don't expect you all to have it cloned on Tuesday, Thursday, so we'll have the TA Slack this activity out from our GitLab repo. Activity number 14, it looks like. And I'll go ahead and open it up inside of the browser so everyone can look at it. So, using Twitter Bootstrap, you're going to create a layout that looks something like this, with a header and a bunch of columns and some text. So, spend some time drawing this out, count the number of rows and columns, and then use your Bootstrap grid syntax to get this done, okay? So we've seen Bootstrap for a little bit now. I've done a couple examples for you. You guys have talked about it. Now we're going to put it to the test. This is activity 14, text layout, in week 2. And you don't get anything to start. You don't get an HTML page or anything, so you're going straight from scratch, okay? So I'm going to give you 20 minutes to work on this. We'll talk about it a bit, and then we'll go ahead and go to lunch, okay? By the way, if you want to generate this lorem ipsum text, this like generic text, I'll Slack out a link you can go to help you generate that, so you don't gotta type it. Make him type it? Yeah. Type this in 20 minutes, all of it, every single one, no copy paste. No, no copy paste. I'm gonna watch.
It's kind of a strange thing, like all around like programming and stuff.
Some weird Latin text. Yeah. Oh, I have auto completion turned on in my USB. I just like opens the next tab and then I.
Well, so let's say it autofills it, how do you calculate this?
Oh, I pressed it. Add takes you to the end of the line.
See, that's my side.
Use a new Mac keyboard, you probably don't get it. Do a command, it's either command or option, like, right. One of those two will take you to the end.
Command right takes you all the way to the end.
Yeah, so that's your effective end of line.
It did.
There you go.
I know it's a stupid question, but like zipping between things.
Yeah, I was always like with Windows laptops, you have the home and end keys, and then Macs don't have that.
Insert your snippet, insert the bootstrap.
Because if I don't have this container, whatever.
Oops, I closed the instructions. My bad.
Medium is MPD, right?
Yeah.
Is it all in one?
I'm gonna open the instructions again. I accidentally closed them.
It comes in handy when you have a big monitor. I have 3 at work. Makes it so nice.
I pretty much always use 3 at work also.
Yep. Yeah. We at the place that I used to work at, our security guys, they had up to like 5 monitors. They have a laptop and then like 4 monitors after that. It's like, dude, why do you guys need all that?
I've wanted to get 4, so I wanted to do. Usually, you have like a laptop, and I want 3 more because the laptop screens are generally too small.
Yeah.
But where I'm going now, I think they only have 2 main monitors, so I'm gonna ask for a 3rd one because 2 is just not enough.
I was thinking about getting one of those ultra wides. Because that way you have like a lot of real estate, but at the same time though, it's technically only like 2 small monitors kind of put together.
I have an ultra wide at home, and yeah, it's like it's not one of the huge ones. It's only like it's probably this long, right? So it's like 2 small monitors. Right. So it works. It actually works pretty well, but I want a wider one. If I get an ultra wide, I want the widest one I can get. Yeah. That'll make a difference.
Yeah, I know LG has one that's like. 38 wide or something like that.
The LG 38.
Nice. Yeah,
I want that
ones.
one. They're expensive though.
Yeah, they are. The prices are starting to drop on them a little bit though, because I know they used to be like over 1,000, and now you can probably pick one up like a decent one for probably like maybe 500 or something like that.
Yeah, nice.
But that's still a lot of money for a monitor.
Yeah, it is.
You have another VS Code open? I operate on the principle if I can get anything, I can get more when it cracks.
Well, you know, with the whole concept of grid, like just looking at this, so you can kind of picture, you know, columns, right?
Yeah.
And then, but you know, between this one, and this one, you can see that there's a different number of columns, right? So that should essentially dictate rows.
You're still in one, okay. Inside the container, row 1. Inside row 1, put the header. And then I'm going to make a column now for the text number. Or you going to make multiple columns, please?
What's up, man? You look confused.
It's like where it's inside containers and stuff.
Well, I mean, in all reality, you just need one container. That's where all your content is going to go.
One container.
So let's say
Like spread that div all the way.
What about the second row?
So I put my header in the first row.
Okay, so
And then I'm still in the first row. So that's your first row.
Right.
But I'm still in that row, and now I'm going to try to put a column in the row under the header. Because it looks like it's all one block. So now I'm going to have 4 columns, or 3 sections of the board. Actually, 4 sections. This is what happened. This is what happened.
Wait, I didn't even think of it. Because in Bootstrap, the columns will wrap, so if you have more than 12, it'll wrap to the next but with this, since you have 3 and just a space here, so you can declare, let's say column, 2, column 2, column 2, it'll only take up 6, and the rest will just be. But it has to be within the same row. So you can essentially put however many columns you want. If it's more than 12, it'll wrap. If it's less, you just get one.
Well, you know what I did with like Kevin said, it's a C1000 format, so I know my, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to figure out my header.
It wasn't formatted.
But I'm trying to do it without like adding any my
Where did you put the header? Inside its own row. Did you throw columns inside there too? So, Bootstrap by default has its own margins as heading rows and columns. So it's designed to have, each row is essentially designed to have some kind of column inside. Otherwise, you'll see it'll have negative margin. So if you put a div in that row and make it a column, 12, for example, so it should push that. It's all about margins.
Always put a column to the side.
Essentially, that's the way it was designed. Yeah. So if you put another div in that row,
I did. I didn't put, yeah. I put a row and I just put the
so grab that header. Yeah, just throw in a column. Just make it, like a 12, since that's basically one whole row.
Can I still keep the H1 tab?
Yeah, just put that H1 tag inside there. Yep. And it should go. And you can also inspect it in Chrome if you go to your header, and you can see that there'll be some negative margin, because I don't know why they do that. So if you notice, they give them negative margin, and then when you throw a column inside, it gives it, the same margin back. So it's kind of strange. I don't know what their the whole design process was.
Basically, it's a side setting level, but it's smaller. Because the size of the page, it can't fit the elements. Yeah, so if I were to change all of these, or just do, let's do this one, extra. What was the size for extra? Well, it says just column See how oh yeah, that's probably much easier. Right. Yeah. download the voice call. Choose like this one. Yep.
This is better is its own row. That's separated by one row, two columns, and then next is anybody have a piece of paper? Anybody have a piece of paper? I do. Come here.
I think I have it, but it's not going to let me activate it. I don't know if that's...
Good enough. The only thing you can do is try to make.
Oh, I got you. I just have that.
Right.
So I mean, you can play with the CSS if you want to try to use it more. Play with the
Well, like even these, I think I feel like it's more good.
yeah, look at that. But the 14 is the road.
Yeah, that's
The rest of your page here is going to be all of that stuff. It's going to be one row. So this whole section is one row, everything in the middle,
I wasn't sure if that's specifically the activity.
see what they did. So remember which one works for the US. So right now you have 18 columns. So now you have to maybe one, three columns, 12 divided by 3. Yeah, well, it has to add up to 12. Other than that, if it's more than 12, it'll start wrapping. If it's less than 12, then it'll so that should be
I'm dragging that over. Yeah. I wasn't out. I was at home. I fell asleep at like
so going to the next
it'll work. It's pretty loose like that. But once you start having content underneath that, that's when you'll see how the script works.
We're gonna do a couple more minutes and then we'll go ahead and go over the activity.
Make another row. Well, okay, I did this so that this whole top section is one row, but I just realized that it's not because of the way that the page is divided right here. So if you see the division right here, see how this it's a clean break here? This is one column, this is one column, and then inside this column you have one row, two rows, three rows, and then inside this column, inside this row you have one column.
yeah, let's do that. I don't know what this means.
So basically, it's not that
Right now, this is how I
at the end of every line, text, something from line on Windows by default is CRLF. So it's backslash R backslash N. What it's saying is we committed to the code slash N, which is the next baseline ending. It's just the conflict setting that you get. Yep. So the only thing I would add is top row. Notice that there's blank space. I'm trying to get that in.
Yep, that's totally fine. Yeah, so with the deal with Bootstrap is essentially then the amount of columns that you have, you essentially have to add up to 12. If it's more than 12, whatever it is after 12 will start wrapping to a new line. Anything less than 12, you'll just see extra bootstrap. That's all. And you don't need to have exact reference point. So you can have a row of 2, 3, 3, it'll only take up 6.
Yeah, I originally thought that.
So anything more than 12 wraps, anything less than 12, you get more space.
This is how we do it.
Yeah. And it's 2 columns. It's actually 2 columns, and then 3 columns.
So it's going to be like this. You have one row, or one column, and then two columns. So if you look at the image, it's a firm.
It's all that Texas format.
Right. It's a hard bar right here. So it's one row, then it's the second row. This whole second row of text is broken into 2 columns, 1, 2, and then inside those columns you have row, row, column, row. And then in the second one you have row, column, row. Yeah, so that's how it is. It goes, so this is the whole container. The whole thing. One row.
Right, but I mean, like,
with one column inside that is the size of the row 12.
oh, well, that's what's going on.
Then you're going to have a second row, which is the whole page. And then you're going to have inside that.
We're going to talk about it in a minute. So you have a minute to finish up whatever you're doing. Cleaned up.
Column 1, column 2. But then inside column 1, you're going to have a row that has 2 columns. And then you're going to have another row that has 3 columns. And then you're going to have another row that has 1 column. And then in column 2, you're going to have 1 row that has 1 column, or technically 2 columns. And then, like, you're going to make this size half of it. So you're going to have 1 half and a blank half. So you're going to have another row with 3 columns inside it. And you're going to have another row with 2. It's all messed up. They're all
Very, very good about your format. It's extremely important, especially if you So no.
So after the fact,
Then I was looking at about
No. Just be very clear and concise in your formatting. All right. How's everyone feeling? Yeah? We're good? Fist of 5. How are we all feeling on Bootstrap and the layouts? Okay. So we're mostly all right? Yeah? Okay, cool. Well, we're going to go over this exercise real quick, and then we're going to go ahead and go on break and eat some lunch.
I had to start over. I did it wrong at first.
All right, let's cover this. First things first, you always need your Bootstrap link. If you don't have that, none of this would have worked. That would have been frustrating. So, we had our image, and I'll go ahead and I'll open this in the browsers one more time so we can check it out. So this is the final image, right? The first one we have is the header, giving it its own row and just making it a full width. Totally cool. That's all you need. So one of the things that some people might have ran into, be if you didn't have the column inside the row, the header would have a weird position, and it wouldn't look right because those columns have their own padding and margins and stuff to like align them up on the screen. So again, if we remove that column, it'd be in a weird position. Or if you didn't even have it in a row, it might be in a weird position. If you just put the H1. Or it might look fine. As long as you get it to look good, that's good. But I would always recommend, even if you don't think this header needed to be in its own column, to put it in a column, because it's only going to make the responsiveness better, right? It's going to make everything line up. So for the first one, we had 3 columns in a row, right? It didn't take up the entire space of the screen, though. So one of the things people ran into was we have 3 columns. We need to make this out of 12, so we'll make the columns of size 4, and then all of a sudden those 3 columns take the full width of the page. So you don't actually need to take the entire 12 units up with your columns. You can take up less than that, and whatever's left out of the 12 is blank space. So in this case, you could do 3 columns of 3. We have 3 units of blank space, which is an even width with the other 3 columns, and it comes out fine.
Are the empties like a placeholder?
No, they're just, the rows know how to calculate it, so they'll take care of it for you. So there's kind of like an implicit placeholder, I guess. It's just empty space. For the next, we had 6 columns. 6 small columns will do it. No blank space or anything. You just put the text in there, and you do 6 columns that add up to 12. So they're going to be 2s. Okay. And then for the last row, we just have 2 columns right here, right down here. They're going to be of size 6 because we want both of them to take up the full width of the page. Any questions on this? Cool. We are going to go ahead then and go to lunch. Be back by 12:40. And then we'll keep going. So I'm going to turn off the stream, turn off the recordings for now while we go eat. Also, I'm slacking out a link to a video related to Bootstrap layouts and stuff if you wanted to watch it.